Welcome to Profiles in Leadership interview series. This is where pearls of wisdom are shared by those who lead. So we have John Childs with us today. John, thank you very much for being here. Really appreciate your time. Dr. Childs is the founder and CEO of Evidence in Motion and a partner in Confluent Health, which includes Evidence in Motion, a network of 80+ physical therapy clinics, and Fit for Work, which helps employers decrease injuries and workmen's compensation costs. A graduate of the U.S. Air Force Academy, he completed his MBA at the University of Arizona and his PhD from the University of Pittsburgh. Having served 20 years in the Air Force, Dr. Childs has collaborated on more than $10 million in grant funding and published more than 150 scientific papers. He is an Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year finalist, a San Antonio Healthcare Hero, and the youngest ever APTA Fellow. You can follow Dr. Childs on Twitter and other social media at ChildsJD. John, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Steve.
Yeah, so this is kind of your hometown, San Antonio.
Yeah, I was joking with someone earlier. It's tough having a conference in your hometown. I'm trying to keep up my normal work schedule and sort of be available.
Exactly, yeah, you get home late at night and your family's like, where are you?
Yeah,
exactly. So when you, did you know that you wanted to be a physical therapist when you entered the Air Force Academy?
You know, I really didn't. When I went to the academy, well, first of all, I said what everybody says when they want to go to one of the service academies. If you go to Air Force, you say you want to fly. Whether you want to fly or not, it's a different story, but that's what you say you want to do.
Right.
What I really wanted to do was originally go to medical school, actually. That was something I'd been wanting to do. It's kind of a kid career in healthcare, that sort of thing. And I'm sort of embarrassed to say, you know, I got picked up, so the academy selected me to go to medical school, but I didn't do well enough on the MCAT to get into medical school.
Okay.
So I got into a few small schools, but I really wanted to go big time, you know, kind of the Harvard. Yeah, I mean, I really wanted to go all in, and I just didn't score well enough. So a friend of mine introduced me to PT school, and the Army Baylor program accepts 2 Service Academy members into that each year from the Air Force. And so I applied for one of those slots and got picked up, and so I'm kind of embarrassed to say I accidentally ended up in PT, but looking back, it was obviously the best move I ever made.
So what's the most important thing that you learned as a PT in the military?
You know, I think probably the biggest things I learned is, number one, just obviously the contributions that our military members make in defense of their country. Certainly over the last 10 to 15 years, you know, you see some of the most severe, you know, kinds of wounds that anyone could experience. I vividly remember going down to the Center for the Intrepid, which is here in San Antonio, and being down there one day, seeing a quadruple amputee in a wheelchair for the first time ever. And even as a healthcare provider, you know, you're accustomed to seeing wounds and those kinds of things, but you see severity of injury that shocks even the most, you know,
seasoned person.
Yeah, exactly. So you know, I learned to obviously appreciate that, and then just the discipline. I mean, just the you know the rigor of a schedule and seeing patients, and you know, the military is all about like a lot of places, you know, productivity and getting people in and out. The culture of PT in the military is a very pro, you know, musculoskeletal direct access. So that was probably one of the biggest things I think that has transferred since then, is just an appreciation for the role of the therapist.
So it's kind of the primary care way that we all want to practice, you know, in musculoskeletal injuries, right?
It is. So in the DoD system, the Department of Defense, it's a single payer sort of system. Financial interests are not as much at play. Spine surgeons in the military don't get paid more for doing, you know, 50 surgeries versus 20 surgeries. So when there's a gray area, they're probably not going to operate. Similarly speaking, there's usually really strong relationships between primary care and PT and orthopedics and PT. Orthopedics doesn't want to see a lot of patients it doesn't have to see, right? The incentive structures are different, so they're happy to collaborate and partner with.
So are you optimistic that style will reach the common people outside the military, or what? I mean, we've been talking about it for how long, right?
You know, you know, it's the age-old question. I think as healthcare payment finally starts to shift around value-based payment, and we get interested in outcomes and costs and those sorts of things as opposed to strict fee-for-service, I think our best days are ahead of us, because clearly PT adds value into that system. And so as the incentive structure shifts towards that, I think PT will really stand to benefit.
Okay. And as founder of Evidence in Motion, what was your vision for this new idea, and have you reached that vision, or are you still going forward? Just fill us in a little bit about how you came up with the idea and where it's going.
Yeah, fair question. So I did my PhD at the University of Pittsburgh back in the late 90s, early 2000s. Evidence-based practice was a brand new word then.
Right.
I had a world-class research experience, doing a lot of clinical trials, working with people like Tony DeLito and Julie
Sure.
Fritz and all those folks. Great experience, and Pittsburgh really prided itself on doing clinical research. It really understood that you can't live in the ivory tower, you need to publish research, it's actually going to inform clinical practice, and that's how you change and influence the profession. So EIM was really born out of that desire to come alongside clinicians and helping them translate research and evidence into practice.
Yeah, and so has it reached that vision that you had, or is it still evolving? Is it still going more and more?
I'd say like any organization, as you know, you've never arrived. The day you think you've arrived is the day you're really in trouble.
Right.
But we've, as I look back over the last 10 years, it's been fun to see the number of certification programs, residency programs, and fellowship programs. We really pride ourselves on the ability of our students to be working full-time and complete our programs, in the evenings and on the weekends, at least the online portion. And then they come on site for the hands-on components. So they're able to really dive deeply into their learning. You go to most continuing education courses, let's say it's just a weekend course, the odds are you're going to show up on Monday morning and pretty much practice the same way you did on Friday.
Right.
When you go through longer-term degree programs, certificate programs, you actually have a chance to really fine-tune and
practice
shape
and
how someone actually practices. And so that's been a real, we think, win for us.
So you have Evidence in Motion, you have a multiple site PT company, I know in Texas, and I think it's probably beyond Texas as well. You have Confluent Health, you're involved in the South College Education PT program. And how does this all fit together, and how do you juggle this many balls? And I think we all hear Evidence in Motion, we all hear about Confluent Health, but I don't know, a lot of us know how it fits together.
Sure, you bet. So back when we first started EIM, Larry, Larry's clinics in Louisville were our first customer on the EIM side. So he was actually a customer. We sort of experimented with some of these early ideas. They seemed to work and influence, and so we put two and two together and said, hey, let's try to take this out to other practices. But as part of that, we really needed our own platform of clinics to sort of experiment with, right? We didn't want to take the alpha version to our best customers. We want to take the, more well-refined developed version. So that was the genesis of where Texas Physical Therapy Specialists here in Texas came from. Was a group of clinics to sort of experiment with and see if we could, really put our money where our mouth was. And that's one of the things that at EIM that we tell our customers all the time is we're actually utilizing the very strategies that we're trying to sell you on.
Right.
We're actually a paying customer. Our clinics are paying, fair market value for the kinds of programs and services that EIM offers. And so it gives us, I think, some credibility when we are out there introducing ourselves to other...
You're in the trenches as well.
We're in the trenches as well. And I tell people all the time, I view myself more as a practice owner, buying my own services than I do as the sort of talking head CEO of EIM.
And how many clinics do you have now in Texas as part of that group?
We've got about 20 or so clinics in Texas, and then we had a number of other groups under different brands in other states. And then a number of us came together a couple years ago and put that together up underneath Confluent Health.
Okay, good. So what's the next step in Confluent Health? Just keep growing what you're doing, or is there another phase that you're going to implement at some point?
Yeah, I mean, like a lot of platform companies, if you will, there's tons of opportunity to grow, and there's a lot of interest in PT. It's interesting, you hear the naysayers all the time complaining about payment and all the challenges, and they're certainly there.
Sure.
But when you look at private equity and other investors, they're very bullish on the profession.
Really are.
So there's a lot of activity going on. So it's a really, we think, historic time to be in the profession. So, we want to continue to, operate day in and day out. I mean, the day you forget your fundamentals, the day you get too focused on the future, is the day you start going backwards. So you gotta mind the bakery, if you will. And we just think if you execute on the vision every single day, you'll end up in a good place.
You're going to grow anyway.
You're going to grow.
Yeah. So your organization has always emphasized world-class customer service. You guys have talked about it a lot. So how do you teach and mentor the new professional that joins your organization with that concept?
Yeah, no, Larry was a real pioneer, I think, in really bringing customer service into the physical therapy space.
Right.
Every operation delivers quality care, right? You see
right.
it in everybody's
Yeah.
tagline, and so it's almost a commodity that you deliver quality care,
Sure.
and most patients think everybody delivers quality care, and so one opportunity to really differentiate yourself is delivering red carpet, customer service, and that's one area. And healthcare, healthcare providers really struggle with that. You got white walls, white coats, waiting long lines, and those kinds of things. So when you can deliver really high-touch service, it really helps differentiate your practice, shows that you care. We take the position that soft skills like caring and empathy have really been underemphasized.
Right.
We've gotten maybe too focused on technical skills, and my hands are more. I can do more fancy techniques than you can, and those sorts of things. And skills certainly matter. But if you don't do them in the context of empathy and caring and compassion, you're not going to optimize the outcome. So we implement a lot of training in the early phase of therapists' employment with us, from leadership training to customer service training, to care excellence training, empathy caring. We have a course that Larry helped put together called Called to Care that all of our therapists go through. So you get what you emphasize. So if you create a culture where the expectation is caring and empathy and high-touch service, that's what.
Is it easily embraced by your new people? I mean, do they love it, or do they you kind of have to bring them along to that point?
Well, I think it takes a little bit of a shift. In academic programs, the soft skills we think are underemphasized. So you largely recruit these therapists who are really focused on their hands-on skills, and they think learning the next fanciest sort of magic bullet treatment is going to be the panacea for all their patients. So you almost have to reverse engineer them a little bit and take them back to their roots about what their mom and dad maybe taught them growing up about using their manners and showing up on time, and in this red carpet service, I'm not talking about waterfalls behind the counter and cappuccino in the waiting rooms. I mean, it's just plain old fashioned being kind and on time and just over delivering with respect to what the customer wants.
Yeah, we talked to Bridget earlier today, and you're one of the few companies, I think, my company was one as well, that really emphasized and had a very structured leadership development program. But that's not the norm. And so what's your philosophy on the leadership development side beyond the customer service?
Yeah, you bet. There's always the debate about, is leadership, born? Can it be trained? And we sort of bank on the idea that leadership can be trained. I mean, certainly there are individuals that have some unique, maybe genetic traits that predispose them to be a leader. But we invest a lot of resources into various leadership tracks over the therapist's first several year with us. We have a program we call PTville, which is, I know you guys at TAI had a similar sort of leadership development track. All the way up to like our executive program in private practice management, which is almost looks like an executive MBA of sorts, specifically geared for practice managers.
To teach that skill. That's awesome. So you are known as a thought leader, in our profession, and one who's not shy to voice your opinion on what we need to do as a profession. So what has to change in the next few years for physical therapy to be in the game of healthcare reform, where we can actually bring down healthcare costs?
You bet. Well, I'll focus, I guess, my response on where I'm spending most of my energies these days, and that's in really trying to reduce the cost burden of entry-level DPT and improve the quality. So we think that higher education is going through we can't continue to sustain the tuition increases we've seen in higher ed. And as a profession, we're likely losing some of our best applicants to other healthcare professions because the costs simply don't make sense. Now the good news is most folks who get into PT we don't get into it for the money, but the return on investment still has to make some common sense.
It's got to be there, sure.
And so we think that one of the fundamental things we have to do to optimize our chance for long-term success as a profession is lower the cost of education, improve clinical education. Clinical education hasn't really been touched in the last 50 years. So as part of our 2-year accelerated blended model that we've been working on, we really want to try to standardize clinical education, make it more predictable, and provide a therapist to the workforce that's not so burdened with debt that they're expecting to, make $80,000-$90,000 as a new therapist.
And the clinical side, I mean, the old system is basically counting on the charity, in a way, of the physical therapists that are in the field to educate these students. Yep. And so this is another way with your program that you're getting them to not only generate some revenue, but be part of the staff earlier on.
No, that's exactly right. I mean, and I'll put my academic hat on and say, the problem of clinical education is when we send students out to clinics, our strategy as an academics as a whole is to sort of just hope and pray that the student learns something.
Yeah.
That's not much of a strategy.
Yeah, exactly.
And so we really want to have a strategy in a way to measure that the students are actually making progress, delivering the outcomes that you would expect. And ultimately, we think transitioning into residency training is really the wave of the future.
Yeah, and we had the Graham sessions earlier this year in January in St. Petersburg, Florida, and you debated with Jim Gordon from the USC program, which would be more of a traditional program, and just rave reviews on it. People loved hearing it because it was, you're both eloquent speakers, you're both really smart, you both really believe in what you do, and it was just a really great, great exchange of ideas. So thank you for that. I think people really enjoyed it at that.
Yeah, no, and even to our critics, and I'm not suggesting Jim is necessarily a critic, but we learn a lot from that. So we enjoy hearing sort of the opposition viewpoints, if you will, because it makes you better. If you're willing to listen, you find little pearls that you can twist and change and improve upon.
Yeah, and that's what the Graham Sessions is all built on, is that, come and say your thing, but more importantly, listen, because you can learn a lot from that. So do you think PTs are territorial and kind of resist working together and collaborating? And is this true in other professions too? Sometimes we get so insular in our own little world, we don't know what other people do, but it seems like sometimes to collaborate together, I'm not sure we do a good job of that. What do you think?
Well, I always say as PTs, we're sort of our own worst enemies. We tend to be the good news is most of us are high empathy kinds of folks. We're generally caring.
Yeah.
But in a lot of ways, it makes us weak when it comes to things like advocacy. We don't really stand up for ourselves as much as maybe other professions would. We've had too many turf battles for too long internally. We debate over this manual therapy camp versus this camp, and should we be teaching dry needling in entry-level education or not? And really, our battles, if you will, are much more outside of healthcare, and we need to have a much more multidisciplinary sort of a focus. The days of us, fighting with athletic trainers and massage therapists, and it's like, do we need to have another exhausting battle? We've got plenty of things that we can work on in our own house, if you will, to really show value to the healthcare profession.
So are you optimistic that we're there? Are we starting to get in those areas where we're reaching out to do that, or are we stuck in the old way?
Yeah, I think we're making a lot of progress. I've been really pleasantly surprised. I was glad to see Justin, appointed as CEO. He's got, I think, a terrific vision for where we need to head as a profession.
Right.
I made a comment to somebody earlier today, and it's just the nature of I think a lot of professional associations, unfortunately academics are some of the only people that have enough time to get really involved in an organ, really, really involved.
Right.
And so, I was glad to hear Justin say, one of the things he really wants to change is just reduce some of the meeting structure so that more busy practice-minded people get more diversity within the leadership. And I think that our, with folks like Sharon and others are really starting to point us, I think, in a very positive direction.
It's a good point, because if you run on a volunteer organization, but the time commitment becomes so great that you can't do it, then you're going to only have a small group of people that can do that.
And there's heroic people like you that will step outside of your practice as a CEO and lead the private practice section and those sorts of things, but it takes more than just the most heroic top 1%. You really need to get leadership down into the average therapist, if you will, so that more people have an opportunity to be a part of affecting the change.
The story I love to tell is that when I was private practice section president, we talked for years about having this program that went over a year long to teach people how to be better business leaders within physical therapy. And we're a volunteer organization. We tried some things with the University of Baltimore. We tried some other things and we just couldn't get it off the ground. And finally I said, we're a volunteer organization. We don't have the time it takes to put into this. That's when I met Larry and you and just said, can you help us? Let's partner. And you guys had it up and running. I mean, I remember that conversation was in February and that program was up and running. I was in the first cohort in September of that year. That's the difference, because you have people full-time focused on it, ready to go, and you can only expect so much out of a volunteer organization, I think.
You bet.
Yeah. Describe what you think is going to be a typical private practice setting in 10 years.
You know, I think, first of all, unlike you hear a lot of people think the days of private practice, the independent small private practice is dead. I don't feel that way at all. I think there will always be a place for highly customized, high service, best in class small practices. If you deliver value and high quality care, you will not have a problem thriving into the future. I do think those practices have to think more multidisciplinary. I think we'll see, if you believe that some form of the accountable care organization and bundled payment is going to, it's going to maybe shift a few different versions, but we're going to see more value-based payment. So you're going to have to participate in the larger ecosystem. You're going to have to be willing to do joint ventures with hospitals and other, potentially you might hire other healthcare professionals onto your team. You might hire a massage therapist. You might hire a physiatrist. You might, and so I think those practices have to think more than just PT.
And even be willing to collaborate more with physical therapists themselves, because as a single standalone clinic, what you just described is going to be hard to do.
Yep, that's exactly right.
So whether you're in a network or some other type of relationship, that could be a way to stay independent, but yet collaborate on these bigger issues.
Yep, you bet.
Yeah. So.
And you hear this all the time, Steve. A lot of private practices sort of have an aversion against larger practices. But ultimately, isn't that a signal of some level of value and success that's being added into the marketplace? I mean, it seems to me that's a good thing for us as a profession to see that.
Yeah, definitely. So what would be your pearl of wisdom to our listeners here today if they want to pursue a leadership position different than what they're doing now? How do you go about doing that?
Everybody maybe tells this story in the context of their own growth and development. I think it's through mentorship. You hear a lot of people talk about networking, and yes, networking matters. It does help who you know, but it's more than just me knowing you and you knowing me. It's me looking at someone like you as a potential mentor, and then adding value to your life. So if you want to get somewhere, I say, well, find someone who's where you kind of want to be. Attach yourself to the hip. Don't just Twitter them and be a social media fan. Actually add value to their life. Come alongside them and see what sort of rate limiting factors they have. See if they'll throw you a few projects your way. Don't care about whether you get paid or not. Over deliver. And just keep doing that over and over and over, and eventually they're going to find you indispensable to their life, and you'll find yourself on a path to opportunities you never would have imagined.
Just be willing to ask. I mean, especially in this profession, I think there's such a giving profession. I can't imagine if somebody came up and said, would you be willing to mentor me in these areas? I can't imagine somebody saying no.
No, I'm notorious for giving out my cell phone on like podcasts and saying, any students or anybody, if you ever want to meet, or here's my cell phone, here's my email, and I'm always surprised at how few individuals actually pick up the phone and call. But here's what's interesting: those few who do, they're gold mine kinds of folks, right? These are the next generation of leaders. I want to know who they are, and I want to come alongside them and mentor them. And yes, out of a selfless heart, right? We all want to give back, but those are also the same individuals that are going to be able to add value to your life and help support you in some of the bigger picture items of things you want to do.
And if you're on the other end of that, as someone asking to you to mentor them, describe a little bit about your philosophy of mentor, because mentoring doesn't mean you got all the answers. Because basically it's just somebody to help lead you to discover it more yourself.
So reverse mentoring is a big word these days, and especially because on the EIM side we work with a lot of students. We have to stay really, really in touch with the needs of the millennials and those students and what they want and what they're interested in. So I love mentoring young students because I learn from them on what makes them tick and
Yeah.
what kind of resources and things that they need to to best learn. So
Right.
mentorship, when it works well, is always a two-way street. Sometimes I think mentorship gets much more of a one. I'm the mentor. Students the mentee, and it's this sort of one-way pipe.
Right.
That doesn't last.
It doesn't last. Yeah.
It's a two-way street.
Yeah, and just being willing to admit that you don't know,
Yep.
and to ask the questions and learn both ways, because there's you and I, you've said it a number of times already today, you and I can learn a ton from a new professional.
Oh, absolutely. And and sometimes younger therapists are surprised to know that I still have a coach. I still have a lot of mentors that
Yeah.
I work with very closely.
Right.
I consider myself a student in most all situations.
Yeah.
And so, mentorship and learning never stops.
I heard the other day that someone I really respect said anyone who's a CEO that doesn't have a coach is fooling themselves. I thought that was pretty interesting.
No, it's very true.
Because a lot of people think, oh, you reach the CEO, now you're there and you know it all, and then as you and I both know that's not true.
Yeah, well, as a leader, it's easy to get a sort of we're above the tree line a little bit, and
Yeah.
you can start to believe everything you think, and as soon as
Yeah.
you start to believe everything you think, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
So you've got to continue to stay humble, stay hungry, to learn, and be willing to be wrong.
Yeah, exactly, and learn from failure, because we're all going to fail.
That's right.
That's how you learn. So,
Yeah.
well, John, thank you so much for being a part of this. You're a great leader. I so appreciate your advocacy for our profession, and I just want to thank you very much for being here. So,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Thanks,
great.
Steve. Enjoyed it.
Great. And thanks to VGM for letting us film today in their booth here at the Combined Sections meeting in San Antonio, Texas, and I appreciate that very much. Thank you.
You bet.